restore the length of our bodies. We restore while we cry. We are nothing if not your granddaughters.
About a year ago, I sat in my friend Bing's living room with her daughter-in-law, Shannon. We were surrounded by all of the things that are left behind when someone passes away unexpectedly. In this case, of a heart attack. There were file folders of documents, half-finished crafts, mismatched Tupperware. We'd been going through her stuff for a few weeks, and the weekend before, her entire family had been there. We'd gone through drawers and drawers of her clothing. It felt like everything we touched held a memory. There were the baggy linen pants that she wore to travel, the t-shirts that she'd cut into scoop necks, the Vietnamese ao dai that she would wear when she presented at conferences. As we sorted through her things, we talked about Bing, we told stories, and we laughed a lot. But this weekend was much quieter. It was just me and Shannon, and we're both a little bit shy, so even though we had known each other for 15 years, Bing had always been our connector. She always knew the joke to tell or the question to ask to really draw us out of ourselves. And so we worked that day in silence. It wasn't really awkward, it was more of understanding, but still Bing's absence was palpable. My friendship with Bing was unique. She was 30 years older than me, and she started out as a mentor. I first met her in high school when my Key Club fundraised for her organization, Children of Peace International, or COPI, to build a school in Vietnam. When I was 18 years old, I traveled with her to Vietnam to dedicate that school, and that was only my third time on an airplane. Because she lived close by, I spent my 20s helping her with the unglamorous chores of international humanitarian work. This is things like cleaning out a storage unit on a really hot day or building a massive spreadsheet of donors. When I moved across the country for graduate school, Bing offered me a job as a grant writer, and that income is what got me through my first year in Chicago, and it gave me experience in the nonprofit realm, which is where I find myself working today. So she had a huge influence on my life. So on this particular Saturday, Shannon and I were going through bags, purses and backpacks and fanny packs, and because Bing could never throw anything away, there were a lot of bags to go through. The first thing we did was to go through each one and find anything she'd left behind. We found tubes of lipstick, business cards, mouthwash, like a lot of mouthwash for some reason, and Vietnamese currency. One of Bing's quirks was that she could never leave anything in its original state. She used to bedazzle her reading glasses, and so the next step was to go through each bag with a small pair of sewing scissors and cut out any pockets she had sewn into them. In the silence, this work became automated, almost contemplative, and I was halfway through cutting out a pocket on this bag when I realized it was something that I would like to have. Honestly, what struck me about it is that it's yellow, and that's my favorite color. So my relationship with Bing really shifted when I moved back to Colorado and I stopped working for her. I would still help her with the occasional odd job, like selling trinkets at Kiwanis conventions or giving my millennial advice on Facebook content for COPI. But we actually started to talk about a lot more than just the work. She really loved Panera, so we would meet at the Panera in Loveland, and we would meet there every December to exchange Christmas gifts. And on those visits, she would tell me all about her opinions on her son's latest girlfriend, which was weird because he's my age and is just kind of an odd dynamic, but Or she would show me dozens of pictures of her granddaughter and tell me every detail of their conversations. Because of her international work, Bing never kept normal sleeping hours. So she would text me at all hours of the night. And one time she called me at 10:30 p.m. and she asked if she could come over and hang out. That was not normal, but I felt like she needed it. So I said yes. And she came over to my house, and she and my husband, Zach, and I went through the McDonald's drive-thru and then ended up talking in our living room until the middle of the night. Another time, shortly after my daughter was born, I came home and found Bing had been at my house for hours, just holding Margot and giving my husband a break. I've been struck since her death at how these are the moments I miss the most about her. She was a world-renowned humanitarian. She was this sort of larger-than-life figure. Bing Rybacki, who gave thousands of scholarships for kids to go to school. Bing Rybacki, who built the first pediatric HIV center in Vietnam. Bing Rybacki, who's the subject of a PBS documentary. And yet, the things I remember about her and I miss about her are these small details. Like that her ringtone was a quacking duck for 12 years. I'm not a stuff person. Oh, I'm sorry. So when I asked Shannon for this backpack, it was kind of a practical request. I had just started a new job and I needed something to go back and forth with. She agreed that I should have it, and then she told me it was Bing's latest traveling backpack, which made me love it even more. I'm not a stuff person. I often wear my clothes until there are holes in them. I throw away birthday cards. I was not the mom that saved baby clothes. But I have lost a lot of people in the last several years, and I've started to appreciate the way that physical objects can help me feel close to them. I call these things everyday relics. A relic is an object that tells us about the past. In archaeology, you might think of stone tablets or clay pots. Growing up Catholic, I always thought of relics as holy, miraculous objects that were linked to the saints. But my relics are just everyday, physical items that I can touch when I need to feel close to someone who's passed away. I started collecting them kind of unintentionally. I remember when my father's mother died, watching my family load up boxes and boxes of her stuff. She wasn't wealthy, so it was not a matter of greed. Instead, they were taking books and kitchen utensils, porcelain figurines, and photo albums. My grandma lived in another state my entire childhood, so I didn't really have a sentimental connection to any of her things. But I did understand what they were doing, and I wanted something to remember her by. Eventually, I found a dress in her closet that she'd bought in the 70s. It was my style, and it looked like it would fit, so I brought it home. It still hangs in my closet, and every time I see it, I think of my Grandma Bridget with her Irish brogue and her love of animals. The collection really started to take shape when my mother's parents died. A few years ago, when they passed away, we again divided their belongings among family members. My mom is one of 7 children, each with their own families, so there were a lot of us staking our claim. I had to be really thoughtful about what I was going to ask for. And as I reflected, I thought back to these nights early in my marriage when my grandparents would have Zach and I over for dinner. It was really simple. We would go to their house and chat on the couch for a little bit, and then we would head over to the kitchen table and eat pasta and talk. Toward the end of the night, my grandma would serve a store-bought dessert and decaf coffee in her plain, solid color mugs. So when it was my turn to choose, I picked dishes. Not china, just everyday dishes. If I had to guess, they probably came from Kohl's. And again, I really felt like it was a practical choice. I think that's important to me in my relics. We had been married for about 8 years at this point, so everything that we'd received for our wedding was broken or missing or just worn down. We needed new dishes, and these ones were plain and solid colored, so I thought they'd go with any house we moved into. And it wasn't until a few months later when I found myself crying at my kitchen sink, my grandmother's brown mug in my hand, that I realized how much the dishes meant to me. Touching them was like touching those nights with my grandparents. Now, every time I wash a dish or I set the table, I think about my Grandma Joanne and my Grandpa Stan and the hospitality that they showed us. The last relic I want to tell you about is the one that actually made me kind of realize this pattern. It is an Amazon TV that my stepdad Randy got me about 8 years ago. He had come over to visit right after Margot was born, and he was horrified that we were watching Netflix on a laptop. And so Randy offered over and over and over again to buy us a new TV, and we refused because Randy didn't have a lot of money. So we told him over and over and over again, no. But the next morning, I woke up to a text message informing me that the TV would be delivered later that week. It is a first-generation smart TV with an extremely finicky remote. And now it's old, and the apps don't update properly. So a few months ago, it started playing only the audio on YouTube videos. And it's our workout TV. It's in the basement now, so that was not good. My husband was actually ecstatic about this development because it meant we could get a newer, bigger TV. But I did not feel the same way, and I found myself fiercely defending a broken television. But for me, it was more than a TV. It was the last gift that Randy ever gave me. And it was a reminder of his generosity, which was always his best quality. Randy, like I said, never really had much money, but he always was willing to give what he had to help others. And now there's this backpack. The airport backpack of the person who taught me how to travel. I can see her looking at it for the first time and exclaiming, "Đẹp quá," which means how beautiful in Vietnamese. I can see her filling it with small toys to give children on her travels. And I can imagine her sitting on a bus with the backpack propped up against a window, using it as a pillow while she naps. My husband works in hospice. So that means we talk about death in my family a lot. We live daily with the reality that everything physical comes to an end. And in a lot of ways, that's a gift. It helps me to appreciate small moments more. I find myself really savoring mornings, sitting on my couch, drinking coffee, surrounded by my daughter and my dogs. And I think in a lot of ways that also contributes to my collecting of relics. It's an intentional practice of remembering. I don't shy away from the grief of loss anymore. I lean into it. But it's a double-edged sword, because the dishes from my grandparents are chipping. We used to have 4 bowls, and now we're down to 3. The dress doesn't fit anymore. And the TV sucks. Bang's backpack has a few new coffee stains on it, and I know that eventually down the road, it's not going to be functional anymore. Everything physical comes to an end. How do I grapple with that? It's a small comfort to realize that all this stuff, each of these things, is really just a symbol for the ways that these lives have transformed me. Of course, I treasure the dishes, but even when they're gone, I will think of my grandparents each time I welcome someone into my home. And with or without the TV, I will think of Randy every time I donate just a little more than I can afford to a random GoFundMe. My hope is that if I embody these traits well enough, that one day my daughter will associate them with me. When I look at the backpack, I can hear Bang's voice in my head, pushing me to solve problems myself. She would often give me impossible tasks, like the time she told me to find a birthday cake in a small Vietnamese town I had never visited before. And as frustrating as these things were in the moment, they really pushed me to do things that I never would have thought possible. So even now, when I encounter a difficult task, I can hear her voice in my head saying, "What do you think we should do, baby?" The backpack also reminds me to stand my ground. When I was about 22 years old, I was on a bus with Bang, and an older man was staring at me, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I lowered my eyes to avoid him. "You have to look at him," she told me. "Look him in the eye and make him know that you see him. It's the only way he'll ever stop." And she was right. This is how Bing led her life. She never lowered her gaze. She stood up to power systems that were unjust, and she spent years trying to improve a country that she had to flee when she was 18 years old. I've been reflecting on these lessons a lot lately. At a time when the world feels particularly heavy, how lucky am I to have her example as a person who always pursued what was right, even when it was difficult or scary. The backpack is mine now. And each day when I pick it up, I'm reminded that the work is too. Thank you.